The US and Europe are placing Ukraine under a military and security shield. The Kremlin is in shock. The West is preparing. Ukraine will be protected under NATO's Article 5. European troops are entering Ukraine. The decision is already made. Reparations for Ukraine are underway. Russia's frozen billions are being turned into weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine. The US is leading the enforcement of the ceasefire. Any Russian attack will get an immediate response from the West. Washington and the EU are preparing a painful scenario for the Kremlin. I'll share all the details this winter. Hello, Ukraine. Today I am Victoria Panchenko, bringing you the latest events. The US and Europe have developed a plan to support Ukraine after the war. American and European diplomats who held negotiations with the Ukrainian leadership in Berlin for 2 days have agreed on 2 documents that define future security guarantees for Ukraine. And they made a joint statement.
The leaders expressed their support for President Zelensky and agreed to back any decisions he ultimately makes regarding specific Ukrainian issues. They reaffirmed that international borders must not be changed by force. The decision regarding territory belongs to the people of Ukraine once reliable security guarantees have been effectively implemented. The leaders agreed that certain issues need to be resolved in the final stages of negotiations.
The statement was signed by 10 leaders of European states and the heads of 2 European institutions, and it declares Europe's and the USA's commitment to work together on security guarantees for Ukraine. The possibility to join remains open for other potential signatories.
It is proposed to have 800,000 personnel in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine during peacetime. A multinational European contingent to support the Ukrainian army and protect Ukraine's air and maritime space. Control. Monitoring of the ceasefire regime under the leadership of Surur Oyshta, early warning of attacks and the development of joint de-escalation measures, legally binding security guarantees, and response to renewed aggression by military, intelligence, economic, and diplomatic means, investments in the reconstruction of Ukraine, the aforementioned compensation for damages by Russia and the continued freezing of its assets in Europe, and resolute support for Ukraine's accession to the European Union.
As for the first document, it contains general security principles. According to American and European officials, in its logic, it approaches guarantees similar to NATO's Article 5, which provides for collective defense in the event of an attack.
The fact that the Americans have taken on such an obligation to defend Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, as if it were NATO territory, I believe is a new position of the United States that deserves attention.
The second document, the so-called military operational one, contains detailed mechanisms of interaction between the armed forces of Ukraine, the United States, and European partners. It describes specific actions in the event of possible future attempts by Russia to seize Ukrainian territories again. The documents have not been made public, however, according to sources. They contain clear instructions on deterring Russia and imposing punishment in the event of new aggression. A priority of the plan is to form a Ukrainian army with a strength of about 800,000 troops. In peacetime, with modern weaponry and training, currently, during the war, the number of Ukrainian armed forces personnel reaches nearly 900,000. For comparison, Germany has about 180,000 military personnel. The document also provides for the deployment of European forces on Ukrainian territory, mainly in the west of the country, far from the ceasefire line. Their task will be to protect the air and maritime space and to provide additional deterrence against Russia. The initiative is coordinated by France and the United Kingdom, within the so-called coalition of willing countries, which includes about 30 nations. In
the framework of these commitments, we could, for example, establish a demilitarized zone between the warring parties. And very specifically, we would also respond to Russian violations and attacks.
U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly stated that he will not send American troops to Ukraine. Instead, the United States plans to provide extensive intelligence support, monitoring the ceasefire regime, detecting preparations for new attacks, verifying Russia's compliance with its commitments, and preventing provocations and false flag operations. In response to a question about Russian President Vladimir Putin rejecting the deployment of foreign troops in Ukraine, Merz sent a clear signal.
Putin has said no to many things. At some point, he will have to say yes when it comes to ending this war. This is the period after the end of this war that we are discussing now, and Ukraine will need protection during this time.
The EU is preparing a reparations loan for Ukraine amounting to 90 billion euros. This was reported by the Élysée Palace on the eve of the European Council meeting in Brussels, according to Ukrinform. 2/3 of this amount are to be allocated for military support, with an emphasis on integrating the European and Ukrainian defense industries.
Currently, the priority is based on the Russian assets that we have frozen. Recently, for a longer term, work is underway on a sum of 90 billion euros for 2026 to 2027. Before transitioning, starting from January 1st, 2028, to more regular funding, which is more typical within the framework of the next EU budget and the next financial framework.
They also added that the discussion regarding the guarantees to be provided to Belgium is progressing, but these guarantees should apply to all countries in order to be acceptable. The funds that are planned to be allocated to Ukraine are primarily intended for military support.
During the debates, the Commission noted that 2/3 of the specified amount should go towards military support and 1/3 towards civilian support. Thus, this reparations loan will include a military component, which will be significant, and the work we are currently doing is aimed, on the one hand, at ensuring all the necessary financial transparency in the civilian sector, along with the reforms that are also required on Ukraine's European path, and on the other hand, regarding the military sphere, we insist that there be clear conditions for European preference.
Such conditions that will facilitate the integration of the Ukrainian and European defense industrial bases.
It is noteworthy that if there are problems with the loan, then Kyiv is counting on alternative financing options for the same amount. We are talking about funds ranging from 150 to 200 and in total $210 billion. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. According to the head of state, any form of financing is critically important for the country.
This is a financial security guarantee for Ukraine. This is part of our guarantees like NATO's Article 5, like weapons.
Currently, 2 options for using these funds are being considered. Plan A is if the war ends, then the funds will be used for rebuilding the country and ensuring macro-financial stability. Plan B is in case Russian aggression continues. Under this scenario, they expect at least 40 to 45 billion euros in financial aid per year, which will go towards defense, supporting the army, air defense, and weapons.
Just imagine, if there is no war, that's 45 billion a year. This is a very significant injection into Ukraine's macro-financial stability, into our recovery, and again, into that same critical area. But now it's not about support anymore, it's about restoring it.
America and Europe have struck at Russia. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom did what no one expected. Support for Ukraine that will crush the Kremlin. Washington and Europe are de facto becoming a united front, already preparing for a powerful blow. All the hottest details right now.
From words to action, Europe has presented its plan for security guarantees for Ukraine. More than a dozen leaders of key EU countries have unveiled 6 points of a document that is meant to protect our country in the future.
We need to reconsider which security guarantees are truly tangible. They can't just be pieces of paper or promises. They must be real troops, real capabilities so that Ukraine can defend itself. We need to understand that Donbas is not the final goal. It's Putin's objective. If they capture Donbas, the fortress will fall and then they will undoubtedly move on to seize all of Ukraine. And if Ukraine falls, other regions will be in danger too. We know this from history and we should learn from history.
So the first point the EU mentions is the need to maintain the current size of the Ukrainian army. The 800,000 people who are currently part of the armed forces of Ukraine should not be reduced even after the war ends. The point about foreign contingents has also been rephrased. In Europe, they no longer say directly that they will send their troops to Ukraine. However, they are talking about a coalition of the willing. With the support of the US to restore Ukraine's forces, protect the skies, and ensure security at sea with possible actions, Also, according to the document post-war, Ukraine must have a mechanism for monitoring threats also under the auspices of the US, for early warning of attacks, recording violations, and the ability to respond to them. Therefore, that same demilitarization is not provided for?
This is truly a far-reaching and significant agreement, one that we have not had before. Namely, that both Europeans and Americans are jointly ready, as President Zelensky said, referring to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. In my opinion, this is indeed significant progress, and the American side has also undertaken this commitment politically and in the future to do so legally as well.
Isn't the fourth point of the agreement perhaps the most important? Yes, European allies and the US, in the event of a new attack, commit to respond with military, intelligence, economic, and diplomatic means. And this is where the most questions arise. After all, the concept of the document still envisions its coordination with Moscow.
It's unclear why Russia would agree to these terms, since in fact what is being proposed today are Western partners. This compensates for a number of mechanisms that Ukraine could receive in the field of security in the event of joining NATO. And if Ukraine receives real security guarantees from the United States and Western countries maintain their presence on Ukrainian territory, of course, this will be perceived in Moscow as an actual defeat, which was achieved at the cost of very heavy losses.
The last 2 points involve partners guaranteeing investments for Ukraine's reconstruction and continuing efforts to secure reparations from the Russian Federation, as well as supporting Ukraine's accession to the EU.
The security guarantees that Ukraine so desperately needs must primarily come from other countries, namely from the United States, NATO member states, and the EU. They are capable of developing these guarantees and providing them.
Meanwhile, the Security Guarantees Agreement has already been commented on in Washington. US President Donald Trump stated that the United States, together with Europe, is working on security guarantees for Ukraine. According to him, Europe will play a major role in this process.
When we talk about the negotiation process, it's not so much a struggle to eventually align our positions with Russia as much as it is, let's say, a struggle and a battle for Washington, so that eventually, with our positions and Washington's, Washington will clearly determine who is the key obstacle to achieving peace.
Experts believe that how realistic this plan may be will become clear in the near future. First and foremost, from the rhetoric coming from the US, which will show whether Trump will continue to go along with Putin's new terms as before, or will he finally start pushing for a unified position from the collective West.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
European and U.S. armies in Ukraine, the United Kingdom and France are preparing troops for deployment in Ukraine amid a new round of negotiations with the U.S. At the same time, the United Kingdom intends to allocate resources for the rapid deployment of its units in Ukraine, including the possibility of training Ukrainian forces directly. More details can be found in the following report.
The coalition of willing countries has prepared plans to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities and to deploy troops on its territory if necessary. This was stated by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. This is happening in parallel with negotiations between Ukraine and the US regarding peace agreements.
First of all, they are not ready. And we need to understand that the decisions of politicians are primarily determined by their deeply rooted domestic, internal political circumstances and unique national interests. Of course, the European Union, as it stands currently, is regrettably not at the necessary level, even when compared to the current situation in Ukraine, to effectively get involved in a direct military confrontation with the formidable Russian Federation.
According to Starmer, politicians want to develop military plans to ensure security in the air, at sea, and on land, as well as to strengthen Ukraine's capabilities. It is reported that a British two-star
It is considerably cheaper, significantly more effective, and fundamentally more important to actively fight and substantially reduce the enemy's potential on another territory. In this particular case, for them, it's Ukraine. So, logically, of course, one particular thing is clearly determined here. But the current political situation, however, dictates something entirely and distinctly different.
It is no coincidence that the British Prime Minister clarified that the plans include deploying troops on the territory of Ukraine only if necessary.
Perhaps after the eventual conclusion of the current truce, and also significantly depending upon the prevailing conditions and circumstances, it will indeed be entirely possible to thoroughly revisit and reevaluate this important issue. And then with the crucial and unwavering help of comprehensive US guarantees, if the stringent conditions of this proposed truce are meticulously met, and if their highly reliable intelligence reports provide a clear and positive assessment on the long-term stability and viability of such a delicate truce, then further steps can be considered. That's when they will be able to send us a contingent, which in principle is not bad either, because we would be able to offload, so to speak, certain regions, certain directions. Of course, this means Western Ukraine, and redirect forces from there to the left bank of the Dnipro.
Currently, for Britain, the priority issue is whether it will be possible to achieve a just and lasting peace. The head of the French Army General Staff, General Pierre Schill, stated that France could be ready to deploy its forces in Ukraine as early as 2026 as part of security guarantees. For this purpose, a reserve of about 7,000 troops has already been created, who can be redeployed within 12 hours to 5 days. At the same time, they do not plan to send their troops to Ukraine. The United States of America.
As for Great Britain, they can certainly afford to comfortably hide behind Ukraine's steadfast back, but the United States of America simply does not possess that particular luxury. And of course, I genuinely think that if the overall geopolitical situation were to truly stabilize, it might very well be something quite similar to the next significant unifier mission, a crucial undertaking indeed.
To deploy their forces. In total, about 30 coalition countries have agreed to this in Ukraine. According to their statements, this will happen immediately after a ceasefire is established, either in the form of a truce or a peace agreement.
The Russian billions frozen in Europe will indeed be used against Putin. For Ukraine, the EU leadership has developed a mechanism that will allow this to be done, bypassing the protests of the Kremlin's friends. Fitzgerald Orban, the persistent one, is already trying to put spokes in the wheels, for which he has been subjected to devastating criticism from diplomats. More about the real passion surrounding Kremlin money later.
A reparations loan for Ukraine is getting closer. The EU has finally frozen Russian assets, which eliminates one of the main dangers. It also deprives the Kremlin's main allies, Hungary and Slovakia, of the opportunity to block the transfer of money to Ukraine. Orban is furious, but this comes as no surprise.
There is absolutely nothing surprising about this behavior. Orban and all his associates are defending the Kremlin's interests against Ukraine. A pronounced Ukrainophobic anti-Ukrainian policy is being pursued, aimed at making Ukraine capitulate so that Orban can benefit from it. Some assets.
But let's take it step by step. For months now, the EU has been looking for loopholes to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan from frozen Russian assets, each time encountering new resistance. But now a breakthrough is near. The European Union has prepared the technical framework to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan. The Council of the European Union has officially prohibited the transfer of frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank back to Russia, and has also adopted a decision on the indefinite freezing of Russian assets located in Europe. The latter means that the EU will not return the frozen assets to Russia until they pay reparations to Ukraine.
This guarantees that Russian funds amounting to up to 210 billion euros will remain within the EU until Russia pays Ukraine full compensation for the damage caused. We will continue to increase pressure on Russia until it starts taking negotiations seriously.
Until now, the freeze was extended every 6 months. And this in turn created the risk that at some point the funds could be unfrozen at an inopportune moment. For example, Hungary might refuse to support the extension of the freeze next time. This could result in a catastrophic scenario. The EU would have to return the money to Russia, but Russia has not yet paid military reparations to Ukraine, which leaves all the costs to the EU. At the moment, this threat does not exist. And quite predictably, Orban was outraged that Hungary was sidelined from decision-making.
This is a declaration of war. Touching the frozen Russian assets, their appropriation is a declaration of war. I have never seen the seizure of 200 to 300 billion euros for Ukraine not provoke some kind of response. That just doesn't happen.
Such an attack on the EU did not leave the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski indifferent. He reposted Orban's message claiming that the European Commission is allegedly violating European law in broad daylight. And he wrote, quote, "Victor has earned his Order of Lenin." Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó rushed to defend his boss. A real war of words began.
We understand that you really want a war between Russia and Europe. We will not allow ourselves to be dragged into your war. If Russia does not invade again, there will be no such war. But we understand that this time you will be on their side.
The head of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, Andriy Sybiha, also responded to Orban's statement very succinctly. He simply called Orban the most valuable frozen Russian asset in Europe, and experts agree with this characterization.
Orban is a Kremlin puppet. He recently went to the Kremlin to receive instructions, so there's nothing surprising about this. In fact, his foreign minister, Szijjártó, is already being called the foreign minister, not of Hungary, but of Russia. He is constantly in Moscow, so Orban and the entire current Hungarian government are completely under the Kremlin's control, carrying out all the whims dictated to them by the Kremlin.
But even if Orban kept stomping his feet, the deed is done. Hungary will no longer be able to obstruct the EU. The reparations loan is now closer to being approved. Now, the granting of the loan will be discussed at the EU leaders' meeting taking place this week. The decisive vote on this issue belongs to the Prime Minister of Belgium. After all, most of the frozen Russian assets are held precisely in the Belgian depository Euroclear. But the EU has already warned that if Belgium continues to put spokes in the wheels on this issue, the same approach as with Hungary could be applied to it: removal from decision-making. What do you think about the updates? Stay informed on events and hit the like button. Peaceful days to you.